Today I'm going to give a value about the role of the classics. Now, one importance of learning from the classics is its theoretical value, where you learn good illustrations of theories in chess, such as in this position in my game against a FIDE master from Germany. Here, at right of this position, one of my coach, I call him as not just only a friend, a close friend, but also a mentor of mine. And at this position, while I was playing against the German FIDE master, he was already murmuring at the sides, at the sides of the tournament hall when I was playing during the 2019 Abu Dhabi International Chess Festival in the Open Division. Di Makiling was already murmuring at the sides. That was a role of the classics, role of the classics. And from that, I was really learning, studying the classics where we can have good illustrations about the theory. In this kind of position, Di Makiling, after the game, in the post-mortem game, showed me the theoretical application of this game about the isolated pawn of this with the same colored bishop. So black here has an isolated pawn, and of course with the same colored bishop. Though it did not happen as what he showed to me a classical game of Karpov versus Spassky in 1979, a Queen's Gambit game that turned out to be this one. And of course, not knowing that game which illustrates the isolated pawn, the same colored bishop, he then showed me the games of it. In fact, in this very own game, it should have happened in the game illustrated in 1979. So we go now to the game of Karpov versus Spassky. The first time Di Makiling showed to me a good illustration on dealing isolated pawn with the same colored bishop. So here it goes. In this position now has been reached, definitely in the game of Karpov and Spassky. Karpov here displayed a good illustration what to do. When learning about this game, it was illustrated well that in dealing with the same colored bishop in an isolated pawn situation is detaching the bishop and the rook. And once you piled up the major pieces against this pawn, especially the bishop aiming with this pawn, all of the major pieces aiming at the pawn, then this game illustrates how to discommunicate the bishop and the rook. The game went as follows. White continued with simply king h2, and black continues with queen b5, and now with the theory saying that in the isolated pawn in the same colored bishop is pressure the d5 pawn with a lot of pieces, all the pieces that you got, and then after black is tangled in defending the d5 isolated pawn, then it's the right time now to simply go for discommunicating the bishop and the rook. And the game went as follows by simply playing, f4. Black continued with f6, sensing that Karpov is going to trap its bishop and trying to discommunicate the pawn on d5. Black just simply go for pawn to f6, making way for the bishop going to f7, once white is going to play pawn to f4. So white continues with queen d1. So the illustration here, it illustrates that first attempt, aside from the f4, is put all your pieces, all you've got pressuring this d5 pawn, the isolated pawn. And when black reacts in simply trying to defend the t5, or all of black's pieces are tied up on defending the d5, then follows g4, and he's now following the theoretical illustration of discommunicating the bishop and the rook. So the game went follows. After black plays g5, white simply go for king h1 for the reason of making his king safety. So black continues with a5, and now here comes now the last execution of discommunicating the connection of the bishop and the rook. f5, and now black plays bishop f7, and now white now comes with the simple e4. And here, white is going to win that d5 pawn whatsoever. So in this kind of position is a clear manifestation or clear illustration of trying to discommunicate the bishop and the rook and ponder an attack on d5. But of course, the most basic attempt against an isolated pawn comes from Aaron Nimzowitsch when he said block, restrain, and attack. At first, before you're going to execute in discommunicating the light squared bishop and the rook, you are going first. The Aaron Nimzowitsch, what Aaron Nimzowitsch said about trying to deal against an isolated pawn with simply block, restrain, and attack. That d5 pawn shall not be pushed further on d4. You have to protect it at all costs. And once you have to simply block him from pushing, restrain him from pushing, and therefore you come with all of your pieces attacking heavily against this isolated pawn. But in the case with a defender with the same colored bishop, with the bishop on g2 and the bishop on e6 defending on the d5, then comes another thing, which is trying to discommunicate the light square bishop from his rook. And in the second game, illustrates another one, how to deal this kind of situation and making this pawn either isolated or either a backward pawn. In this kind of position, in the game of Mamijaruva versus Kudaverdieva, it exemplifies now that in order for that pawn to be under attack or be a sort of a weakness, white must turn it into either an isolated pawn or a backward pawn. So in this kind of position, white now strikes with b4. Whatever black reacts, it will turn out into an isolated pawn or a backward pawn. If black is going to capture that and simply capture with c takes b4, and now we have the same or similar position that turned out in the illustration of Karpov versus Paske in dealing an isolated pawn with the same colored bishop. Now, when white played b4, black simply decided to have his d5 pawn as a backward pawn by simply playing c4. But again, whether it's going to be an isolated pawn or a backward pawn, similar illustration applies. Black, restrain, and attack. White here played rook d4, simply blocking the chances for black to push d4 and eradicate his weakness. But in this case, it's so impossible with the presence of c3 and e4. White was just simply playing rook d4, not necessary to block, but gaining a lot of space for his rook and the queen along the file. So rook d4 indeed. Black now starts to defend rook d6. RAD1, and after RBD8, white continues with queen a5 when white can already direct with queen a2 and queen d2, but white just simply trying to see black's reactions with queen a5. And after king g7, white now starts with simply trying to make some disturbance on the king, especially that the king's position is somehow weak because it's only protected by its own pawns. And who knows, in the later on part, white could create a tremendous attack on the king side by simply playing h5, and with some shift of the pieces towards the king, g3, bishop g2, rook h1 could be a possible scenario later on. However, white is still sticking on attacking the d5 and illustrating the basic concept of dealing the d5 or the isolated pawn with the same colored bishop. With h4, r8, d7, black continues to play h5, and when black plays rd8, when all of black's pieces are tangled in defending d5 pawn. So white continues with queen a2. Now he realizes that he needs now to execute the basic of attacking the isolated pawn by putting the queen on d2. So after r6, d7, and now white plays queen d2, and now we have the position on putting more pressure on d5 pawn. So black plays h6, and that is a real question mark, and gave perfect timing for white by simply capture h takes g6, f takes g6, and here is the final blow and the final execution on isolated pawn against isolated pawn with the same colored bishop in this kind of position by dismantling the communication of the rook and the bishop by simply playing bishop g4. And finally, black was forced to play rook d6, and white has now the final attack to have a decisive advantage with the killer pawn e4, and game continued with simply bishop e8, and now white can now afford with the exchange with rook takes d5, rook takes d5, and simply e takes d5, getting much square or getting much lines or squares to attack the king and elsewhere with multiple attacks with queen d4. And of course, the bishop is actually ready to create lines, or simply rook e1 and somehow with queen f6. And there are plenty of attacks, and black continue with rook d6. White goes for rook e1. Black plays king f7, and now here comes queen d4 check, king h7, and now here comes a attack on the rook and on the bishop, forcing black to play rook d8, and now white is continuing its pressure, making the queen, bishop, rook being overworked, and black plays rook b8, and now here comes the final blow with queen d6, and there's no stopping already with rook e7, and here black resigned in favor black resigned, which white won a very perfect execution and perfect illustration in dealing of the isolated pawn with the same colored bishop. And here is a good illustration why it is very important for us chess players to, or those who are wanting to go on top, the importance of reading and studying the classics for the sake of learning a lot of theories in chess. So I hope you enjoy this video, and you can either repeat this until you digest how grandmasters deal with this kind of theory, isolated pawn in the same colored bishop. So I hope you enjoy this video, guys, and I hope that this will help you on your way up in chess and many tournaments to come. Thank you.